Pitfalls. Good morning and welcome to this first webinar in a series of 5 around migration that we're hosting together with AWS and our colleagues from HeliCloud. My name is Bas Tenatris and I'm a senior business consultant at Oblivion Cloud Control. Oblivion Cloud Control is an AWS partner, in fact a premier partner, which means that AWS has verified our skills, our competencies, looked into what we did for customers and awarded us the highest level of their partner ecosystem in the Benelux. We're purely focused on Amazon Web Services. We have over a decade of hands-on experience with Cloud Platform. Actually, we started using AWS almost the moment it launched in 2006. Initially for Oblivion used it for its own workloads and workloads it hosted for customers. And later, as of 2010, we became a consulting partner and have been supporting customers through their cloud journey on AWS since then. And if you look at our services, we basically help customers from the very early start. Is cloud the right platform for them? How does it work? What do you need to do? What's the business case? Helping them set up a cloud operating model, building compliance control frameworks. We do have a lot of customers in the financial services sector, so it's very important to them. Building landing zones, and more we also helping customers with getting their AWS cost back under control. The platform turns to be very popular. A lot of workloads gets deployed, a lot of innovation, experimentation is done on the platform, but sometimes costs are a little bit from people's mind. And we have processes, we have tools, we have opinions on how to get those costs back under control. And typically we can save quite a bit of money when we start helping customers. We're also more and more helping customers with migrating workloads to the cloud. Initially, companies typically start with building new things on the cloud, innovative stuff. But more and more, as the cloud platform is so successful, they decide to migrate more and more, and in quite a few cases decide to go all in and migrate everything onto the cloud. We do that for quite a few customers and have done it for quite a few customers. Here's an overview of the logos of customers in different sectors that we have done work for or are still doing work for as of today. You are attending a webinar on migration to the cloud. I'm assuming that this is you have experience. You are running workloads on the cloud. Probably new projects, most likely to do with innovation or doing something new. Typical first workloads that we see are web applications, quite often because of the scalability that AWS offers, which is impossible to have the same kind of scalability on-prem. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, we saw coming up in the last 2 to 3 years. A really popular workload. In my view, there's very few customers, very few companies who do AI and ML at scale on their own environment. It's so much easier to do it on a platform like AWS. Because of all the data storage services you have, but also all the pre-configured services that are much easier to use and to leverage than having to set up your own tools and applications. When we talk to big companies, typically their innovation team are the first ones to use AWS, typically because it's so much easier to experiment, so much easier to launch new things. So that's where a lot of experience comes from. The topic is migration, so you are considering migrating more workloads. So not building more new, well, probably also, but also migrating existing workloads that today run on-prem, or they sit in a co-location, or they're outsourced with one of the outsourced companies, and you're considering migrating that to the cloud. But you're not 100% sure where to start, how to approach it, which pitfalls to negotiate, and today's focus is going to be on the business case, because it sounds like a great idea, migrating workloads to the cloud, and by and large it is a great idea, but typically you'll have to defend that and you have to know what are you going to expect. How much is it going to cost me to do that, but also what are the future benefits and how does it stand up to my cost and my current situation. And today I'm not going to tell you exactly, well, fill these numbers in here, click on a button and out comes your business case. There are tools on the market that will help you with your total cost of ownership comparison, that will help you do a TCO compare. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about what is that value on the cloud and how can you work that, and what are the things you need to watch out for, and what are the things that you should take into account in that business case. Now, we discussed that you want to migrate more to the cloud because you perceive that to be of value to your company. Now, the value of the cloud is found in different areas. A lot of companies we talk to mention that their primary reason to migrate to the cloud is all the way on the left side of this chart, business agility. They need that reduced time to market, building new things, deploying new things, running new things in their own environment typically takes much more time and many more processes and involvement of people. And with the average IT shop having a backlog anyway of things they need to do, it is difficult to do that in-house. And if you do something new, you run it in-house and you are successful. If it's really successful and it needs to scale up quickly, that again is very hard to do in-house. And therefore we see a lot of companies saying, well, I need that business agility. As an IT shop, I need to support my business better. And support my business better typically means we need to get new functionality faster to market, or we need to be able to deploy that functionality faster in other markets. That is where cloud typically is, or that is typically the primary reason to go to cloud. Back to those innovation departments, the reduced cost, the increased pace of experimentation, the ability to spin something up, try it out, test it out, and bring it down if it wasn't successful. Think about it, go through your lessons learned, and then try something else again. Can be done at a much lower cost than you could ever do it in-house. Another reason, going a little bit to operational resilience, is typically the cloud is quite resilient. AWS runs a very good platform and gives you lots of abilities to run active across different availability zones. It is a level of resiliency that's very hard to match and very costly to match in an on-prem situation. Another one is regulatory compliance needs. You inherit a lot of regulatory compliance. There's a lot of certifications and attestations that comes with the platform. You still need to make sure your workloads and how you set it up meets those compliancy requirements. But at least for the way AWS sets it up and the way they manage their part, remember the shared responsibility model means that a lot of things you inherit and you don't have to do that yourself. A lot of customers experience that the cloud is more stable. They have fewer outages, partially because the cloud platform is quite good, quite stable. Secondly, running successfully on the cloud, a lot of people start scripting. So if a workload is deployed, it's going to be completely automated. If it needs to be started, rebooted, you can automate that. So it's easier to make a self-healing infrastructure. You could do that on-prem as well. Fact of the matter is that it happens more and more on the cloud. Looking at workforce productivity, automation, obviously, you invest once in the automation, but then you have savings in manual processes. Again, planned and unplanned outages are at a reduced cost. It's much easier to bring something down, bring it back up again, the planned outages, etc. Or if it's an unplanned outage, to restore services. And what we also see is an increased developer productivity. Once developers start using all the higher level services, simple notification service, but also spin up a new database in RDS. Typically a developer had to go to a database group to ask them how to do that. They need to plan it, they need to have capacity and time available. With RDS, anybody can do this. And then we have the last two, cost avoidance. You exchange CapEx for OpEx. You don't need to have all these hardware refresh programs, elimination of the mandatory maintenance, and the fact that the unit price is very small. You can expand. You don't need to have a reserve capacity because AWS has that for you, and you only pay for what you use. So that's a saving. But also you can grow very granular at a very small level. You can spin up a small extra service use a few extra gigabytes of memory, whereas in the past you would have to buy a whole new box or a whole new piece of kit. Elastic, you have the option to do lots of things, but you don't pay for it until you actually start doing it. But also the extreme transparent cost, and I know we don't like to go through these AWS invoices that go page after page after page of which account used what service. I've seen monthly bills that went over 100 pages. So for those customers, we typically build a few tools to be able to quickly make sense out of what comes out of the cost. But the fact that it's so transparent, you can quickly pinpoint, why did my bill go up from one month to the next? If you set it up all correctly, it's possible to figure that out precisely. And we find that typically drives a lean mindset. People need to learn how that works and how AWS cost drivers work. But once they understand that, and once they are shown what the results of their actions are, that typically drives the right behavior, and you don't spend too much. Still a lot of room for improvement there, and we'd be very eager to help you if that's something that you perceive. The fact of the matter is, most of the business cases that we see only look at the two right side columns. They look at cost, they look at like for like. I'm running today so many cores, so many terabytes, so many gigabytes, and I map that to AWS. And in fact, that's not an easy thing to do. It's not that's so easy. Although with tools, it's nowadays fairly easy. But a lot of business cases don't look at any of the other benefits. And the funny thing is, most companies tell us that those other business agility, resilience, workforce productivity are the reason why they go to cloud. But in the business case, they only look at hardware, software, data center cost. And then you miss a lot of, that means that a lot of the value that you expect to have on cloud is not expressed in your business case. And that's not a good thing. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about over the course of this webinar. So how do you start your business case? Well, it's going back to that previous slide and think about what are the main reasons for your company, for your situation, for migrating to the cloud. And document these and discuss them internally and figure out, can I set a value on these, or at least a priority? And the better you do that, and the better you get the business buy-in, the more successful or the more real your business case will be. And we think that's quite an important reason for success for your cloud migration project. Now, if you are a somewhat larger company with a whole bunch of workloads and maybe different business units or divisions or however you want to call it, it might be that not for every application or group of applications or every domain in your company, the reasons for going to cloud are the same. Some may really want to have that business agility and improved resilience. Those are typically the ones that are pushing, that are pulling, that really want to go to cloud. There might be other areas where they say, well, we see really it's very stable, everything runs fine, we don't need that scalability, we don't need all those other services because we hardly do any development, we're just doing some maintenance. They might be interested in having lower cost. Everybody's always interested in lower cost. So you may have different reasons for different groups of applications. It's important to document that and to have that discussion in your company to make sure that everybody agrees what application or what domain goes to cloud for what reason, and have those documented and try to put a value on it, even if it's just a sort of range that this will save us between X and X. If you look at developer productivity, there are some reports from IDC and a few others that have looked at it and come up with quite some good experiences that the longer people use cloud, the more benefit they get out of it because of the learning effects and therefore the increased productivity in development, but also in operations. Select a tool. We're going to be talking a little bit more about tool. I'm not going to tell you exactly which tools to use, but there's a few, and you can find a few on the AWS Migration Hub. AWS offers their own tools. It used to be TSO Logic, now got a different name. We'll talk about that later. Select that tool and have it start running, because you want to have it run over at least 1 month period, so you capture any end of month effect. If you are in a business where you also have very different months with different workloads, different demands, very different processes, maybe an end of quarter or end of year, if possible, look at that. Have the tool run during that time, if that is possible in the timelines that you have. Start collecting data on today's costs. So talk to your finance team, and don't just take the costs that are currently showing up in your internal cost accounting as all there is. There typically is cost associated with running your own data center that may not always reside under the IT spend budget. For example, if you have an in-house data center, is all the real estate cost captured there, or is that one generic cost? If you're going to expect to save some labor in terms of data center operations, where do those costs sit? Insurance, power, heating, cooling, is that all in the current IT budget, or does that sit in the general budget for office space? If it's somewhere else, try to identify it and agree what percentage are we going to expect to save if indeed we can close down the entire data center, or if we shrink the data center significantly. Is there any capex expected, major hardware refresh in 1 or 2 years? Well, important to identify, because the finance people will want to know that if you're going to cloud, that maybe part of that is no longer needed. Migration patterns we're going to talk about in a few moments. There's a different way of moving to the cloud, and you need to select, again, one size doesn't fit all. You need to select which applications benefit the most from what kind of pattern on the cloud, and how does that drive the migration. In some cases, you'll see people doing a quick lift and shift, and then once things have landed on the cloud, start modernizing applications, replatform, refactor, etc. I would urge you to, at least in this phase, already look at that, because it will determine heavily what value comes out of it, and it's important to capture that already in your business case. Adapt the plan, reiterate it until you meet your financial hurdles or any other hurdles you have to meet internally, but also discuss it at length internally, and make sure you create that buy-in from the business, from the application owners, from the application users, because typically you can't do this migration in isolation. It's not, okay, we're going to replace our, storage environment by something else, and we need a long change weekend, and that's it, and hardly anybody will notice that it ever happened. This takes more involvement of their business, even if it's only that they need to test applications once they have landed on the cloud. They need to have budgeted that for that in their plans, time and money. So be early, involve the business, and get them excited about what they can expect once they're on the cloud, what they cannot have today or can only have at more cost and with more hassle. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about tools. Tools are important because they'll help you enormously in two areas. They'll help you figuring out, what do I have today? Maybe you've got everything running on VMware and you can easily get it from your own tooling, but typically the tool-based application discovery will help you figure out, what do I have today? How much does that take in terms of CPU usage, memory, storage, and the right tools, and one example is the migration evaluator, formerly known as TSO Logic, but there's others, Cloudomize, CloudChomp, that will discover, and they'll have typically very smart algorithms in place that will match it to the current infrastructure, to the current cloud offerings from AWS. So they'll have the latest and greatest in terms of what AWS instances exist, and they can map to the best family. And as you know, AWS has quite a few EC2 families that you need to choose from, so they'll optimize that, and they do quite a lot of right sizing. And that's important because that will help you if you are oversized today, it will help you get that right. There's also some tools, and for example, Migration Evaluator is one, but there's a few others as well, that will also take a hard look at some of your ISVs, mostly Microsoft, for other software vendors, not so much yet, and they'll find opportunities to optimize. So they'll look at, are there any instances, Microsoft environments that are hardly used? Well, maybe you can get rid of that and create some free room in your current license contracts, especially if you're running up to an EA renewal with Microsoft. This is extremely valuable to get the insight of what do I have today, and help you together with your people who manage your licenses or procurement figure out, are we exposed because we might be under licensed? Are we not so much exposed because we're actually over licensed? But also look at, can I run these things from Microsoft, but also from Oracle and IBM? We'll talk about it later in a little bit. Can I use those on the cloud? And if I can, what are the risks that maybe the software vendor will argue that I need more licenses than what I used to have? It will point you to a number of tools that AWS has that will help you reduce that ISV license exposure. For example, the use of dedicated hosts, etc. That will allow you to bring Microsoft licenses that otherwise you could not bring to the cloud. It will also help you run scenarios for uptime. For example, most companies will have development run on demand and expect developers to switch there, to kill their EC2 instances, to stop them when they go home. You may want to monitor that, you may want to automate that it actually happens. Otherwise, you're going to be ending up spending a lot of time or a lot of money for things that are just idle. And an idle EC2 instance, if you haven't stopped it, will still cost you money. It will also help you run scenarios on using reserved instances or savings plans. Most companies initially start working with, okay, all production goes on always on, and therefore we're counting with 3-year full upfront RIs, which mimics your current cost, because today you buy hardware and you need to pay for it, and typically you write it off in 3 or 4 years. But that's typically not how you're going to actually run on cloud. If you run on cloud properly, you may want to switch off your Office applications outside of office hours. Why have those all up and running over the weekend at night when nobody's using them? And maybe you only want to have your customer-facing applications always on. So be a little bit more granular than just saying, oh, well, we'll put everything always on because that's what we do today. Yeah, you do it today because there's no saving in switching your own dedicated hardware off at night. It might save a little bit of power, but it's not worth the trouble. Running on AWS, it does make sense. So compare the big savings you get with a 3-year commitment in a savings plan or an RI, or maybe the even bigger saving by counting that Office applications are only running 50 or 60 hours per week. So use the tools wisely. They'll give you a lot of information. They'll show you how to map that to AWS. There's still some decisions you have to make yourself, like what kind of an uptime do I want, and run those scenarios. Look at that. We'll talk about licenses a little bit more in a moment. Migration patterns. I mentioned it before. Not everything goes to cloud in the same way. And that's also back to, what do I expect in terms of value? And if that value has a lot to do with business agility, giving DevOps teams more autonomy, etc., then rehosting or a lift and shift might not be the best way to do it. You may want to replatform. You may even want to refactor. But look at your complete application landscape and start looking at these. It used to be 6, but nowadays we're talking about 7 Rs. And you'll always find applications where you're actually going to realize, especially once you talk to the business, it's hardly being used anymore. This particular application's been sitting there, it's been running, it's been doing things, but it's been hardly used. I might as well retire it. Sometimes functionality has been duplicated and whatever people still expect from it can be delivered somewhere else. So if you find applications where you can say, well, retire, that's a big saving. Now you're gonna have debates internally. Is that a saving due to cloud? No, because you can probably switch it off today, even when you're not migrating, and that's fair. On the other hand, if you find it out as part of your cloud migration project, you can argue, well, hang on, without this cloud migration project, it would have still been there because nobody bothered to switch it off in the past year or years. So at least highlight it that this is not gonna migrate. It's gonna retire. Retain, meaning we're not gonna migrate it. We're gonna leave it where it is today. Those are applications where, for whatever reason, you find that the benefits might not be that big, or the migration cost might be very high and are not offset by very high benefits. So for now, let's leave it where it is and think about it later, a little bit later. Typical workloads are, for example, things running on mainframe, because those are, I'm not saying it cannot be done, but it's hard and costly to untangle workloads from a mainframe and migrate them to cloud. So a lot of companies will say, well, let's leave the mainframe where it is. Maybe we'll outsource it temporarily to get some benefits and get some flexibility. But those sometimes are retained. Retained might also mean, well, we think we're going to repurchase later. We're going to bring it into a SaaS offering. So we don't want to migrate it. There's different reasons why you say, well, this application is not going to be in scope, or we plan to sunset it in a year. Might as well keep it here, not spend money on the migration, and just sunset a year from now. So it's different reasons why retain is an option. And obviously, for those you have to count, okay, what are the costs of continuing to run it? How much of a IT organization, data center do I still need to maintain to run these particular workloads? And if you have an on-prem data center, you may want to look at, well, does it make sense to still keep those servers in-house? Or is there a possibility to put it with a hoster or something else? Repurchase, maybe your software vendor has a more cloud-native version available that you can easily launch on AWS, so you just need to migrate the data. That could be for things that you have bought today. You already have COTS and you're moving to the cloud-native version of the same vendor, or maybe even their SaaS version. It could also be, well, we had built an in-house CRM system and now we're going to cloud. We're going to replace that by a cloud-optimized CRM system. So repurchase is a good option to look at. Rehost, also called lift and shift, is typically the default pattern that everybody looks at, and also that typically is easy to investigate, to put some cost assumptions against. So a lot of business cases that we see are largely built around rehost, and that's fine. But you don't always get the maximum benefit out of the cloud. If you're going to rehost a database, you're still going to be managing that database going forward. It just runs now on an EC2 instance, where we will say in a lot of cases, look at RDS. Yes, you pay more money to AWS, but the value you get out of RDS is much higher, and typically easily offsets the cost savings that you're going to make in your own organization. So rehost, yeah, it's typically the default. Do spend time on building the scripts so things can be deployed automatically, can be fixed automatically if something happens. But also look at which applications, which workloads, which databases would benefit from Replatform, bringing it to a more cloud-native service offering. Taking that to the next level is what I would call is called refactoring. You're really going to break up that application and do other things with it. Relocate, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but that's actually the seventh R that was added to this overview when AWS and VMware launched VMware Cloud, I think about 3 years ago now. And migrating from your on-prem VMware environment to VMware Cloud is actually the easiest migration you can do. It's almost point and click. It's and for your team, they still use the same tools. It all feels very familiar to what it is today. So I think it's a great way to migrate. Now VMware Cloud doesn't scale as granular as AWS itself. You can't just add some EC2 smaller instances. You need to go with bare metal servers that are underneath the VMware hosts. But it's still a very good way to migrate. And once you have things running on AWS on VMware Cloud, you have access to all the additional AWS services for every application that has or process that has a benefit from that. I'm not going to spend too much additional time on that. If you are interested, reach out to us and we can have a chat and talk about what VMware Cloud can do for you. Let's have a quick look at a more comparison of rehost, replatform, and refactor. So as I said, rehost, lift and shift, typically has the lowest migration cost, but the cloud benefits are also somewhat lower because you're still running on a right-sized EC2 instance, but you don't get much of the other benefits. Migration costs are typically low, but watch out for the ISV licenses. Can you migrate that license from your current on-prem, your operating system, is that in case it's not Linux, any other, whether it's a SQL Server or other thing, look at can you migrate it and what does it mean running on AWS. Replatform examples that I already mentioned are the move from a commercial database to RDS, but you can also look at move to an open source database, typically bringing quite a few savings. I know companies that hardly use open source databases on-prem because they perceive it to be hard to manage, difficult to do. On AWS, it's fairly easy. AWS supports this. They've set it up in an optimized way. And it's much easier to start using things like Postgres or MySQL. Another one could be, for example, WebSphere. Lots of companies having big WebSphere farms. You could migrate those to the cloud, but WebSphere brings quite a bit of overhead, so that means that you're already running on fairly large EC2 instances. Some people find that actually Tomcat works just as well and meets most of the functionality that WebSphere delivers. Migration costs are typically medium to high in benefits. Again, watch out for those ISV licenses. Not all database companies will allow you to bring that license to RDS. So you need to factor in the cost that you may need to go with the license included. But you will pick up savings because you're now using a managed service, which means that AWS does the maintenance for you, does the day-to-day operations. Typically the availability is better because these servers are typically available at the region level. So if something were to happen to an availability zone, AWS will fix that for you. So it brings already quite a few cloud benefits to your workload. Refactor, sort of considered to be the royal road to cloud, the best way to do it. You're going to break up your application, maybe into microservices, make it serverless or use serverless components from AWS. You're going to leverage all these pre-built AWS services. Now the migration costs are going to be high. These are projects with extensive work and therefore extensive testing. The benefits you get are high, because these are managed services that you're going to leverage, so reduce management cost, higher productivity for your development team, improved scaling. Often it's now charged by the transaction, which is much more granular than what you would be able to get in any other scenario. And quite often you're able to remove some ISV components and save money there. How about containers? Well, I would typically categorize that under replatform. Some people would argue it's more rehost, but again, you'll probably want to have a look at benefits to managed container service if you were running your containers on-prem, and then I would consider it more to be a form of replatform. Now, the different R's and AW cost drivers, I think I already mentioned some of this. EC2 applications or EC2 instances and applications that don't scale, or applications that can only scale vertically, that can get expensive very fast, because typically you would size those at their peak load and then build in a little bit of reserve capacity. And that's back to how you would do it on-prem. And that in cloud is expensive, because now you're paying, even if that application runs typically at 10, 15, 20% of its peak workload, you're paying for the whole thing all the time. Some companies will fix it by, if they can really pinpoint when would be the peak, to have it run smaller and then stop it and relaunch it on a bigger instance. But that adds complexity, adds risk that things go wrong. So that's not ideal. But if you have this, you want to start looking at reserved instances or savings plans, because that's your best bet to reduce and manage those costs. Even better would be refactor it, so it can scale horizontally. But if that's too expensive or cannot be done, look at RIs or savings plans and work those into your business case. Take a careful look at data transfer. Data transfer in for AWS is free, but data transfer out, unfortunately, is not. And it doesn't matter how you transfer it out, you're going to end up paying for it. So also look at data traffic patterns. And especially during the time when you still have workloads running on-prem or in your colo, and you have already workloads on the cloud. If those workloads communicate a lot between each other, you might want to keep them together to escape the data transfer out cost. At least be aware of it and factor it again into your case. We don't like surprises. All right, a few pitfalls. There's plenty more, but these are the ones that always come to mind, and these are also the ones that occasionally will destroy a business case if you haven't got all your benefits properly lined up. Well-known software issues with Microsoft, Oracle, and IBM. The main thing is, and I think that counts more with Microsoft, is they only allow you to run your Microsoft licenses on AWS under certain conditions. So you're looking at reserved instances, dedicated hosts, not reserved instances, dedicated hosts, and running AWS services with license included might be more expensive than what you have today. So be very much aware of that. Similar with Oracle, similar with IBM. And also what they sometimes do is they for certain licenses, they may allow you to bring them, but they count the EC2 vCPUs much higher than they would a similar on-prem server. So suddenly running the same workload, you need to have more licenses. Similar with Oracle, you may need to be able to show how you've isolated those Oracle workloads so they only count the vCPUs that you actually use. In some AWS scenarios, you can stop those to reduce the number of cores to actually what you need for your workload. Look at that, track it, so you have no surprises with your next audit from any of these firms. Another one that is less familiar but can also have a big impact is your disaster recovery. If your current disaster recovery is based upon a stretched cluster for high availability, and you've told all your application owners, don't worry, if the server goes down over here, or if the storage crashes, we always replicate our data to a different site, and we can easily bring your server back up on the other side with the data that's always available there. That is not easy to replicate in the cloud. It's easy once you use S3, but if you can't use S3, and nobody coming from an on-prem can automatically use S3, this is not available. EBS doesn't replicate across availability zones. It does replicate within an availability zone, but not across. And that may not be good enough for what your business continuity plan needs. So look at that carefully and figure out how to migrate it. If this is a big concern for you, then take a hard look at VMware Cloud, whether the stretched environment that they can do solves the problem for you. A few other pitfalls is actually the business case. What we already discussed, did you take all your cost into account on the future cloud, the migration, but also when comparing it, did you take all the current cost of your data center into account. Did you also identify other benefits, or did you fall in the trap that a lot of companies do and only looking at cost avoidance and operational cost? What is the right word? Even if you can't put a business value, a monetary value on it, at least show it, identify it, and make sure it's taken into account whenever somebody takes a decision on your business case. Another one that's a pitfall is sometimes when you have these and the tools will help you there, you've created this super right size, super cost optimized business case. It looks wonderful. It's absolutely the lowest cost point you can ever get. That can get a life of its own because you may not want to do that. You may want to do some replatforming to RDS. Well, now your AWS costs go up with benefits elsewhere. But that lowest migration cost and AWS running cost can get a life of its own that will stop you from arguing the case for getting more benefits by investing a little bit more upfront. So I think it's good to make this case, but you don't want to get that out as, oh, this is what we're aiming for, because you may not get there. The 3-year full upfront ROIs, very few people actually buy them. So don't get that to be your future budget, because that's not effective. And also in your migration cost, factor in training cost for your staff. You may want to, if you don't have a proper AWS landing zone, a standard environment account structure, multi-account structure with guardrails in place, with logging setup, etc. If you don't have that, you want to build that. If you do have it, you may want to update it for all the new services and things that you're going to need. Don't forget to add in AWS business support. And also check the current US dollar euro exchange rate. It's been going down in the last few months, so you may pick up a few more savings there. Now you have your business case. You know how you want to migrate. You've identified your benefits. You know per application or group of applications which migration pattern you want to use, and now you need to group them into logical waves. A lot of people will then say, oh yeah, well, let's go do first this technology, and then we'll do that technology, and then we'll do third technology. That is a way, and it's a pattern that's been used and somewhat successfully. I would argue that one of the most important things from my point of view is that you first group these applications using what I would call applications that work together, go together. Why? Because if applications that work together, meaning they are chatty, they have lots of interfaces back and forth, there's a lot of data going back and forth, they are dependent on each other. If they are across different sites, one is on AWS, the other is still on-prem or in your colo, well, latency can start playing a role. It may make your environment less stable. Cost, data transfer out. So if those applications that really work together, they should go in the same wave. If your support team is based on technology, okay, then this argument may not go up so much. But if your support team is based on certain value streams or business processes, well, you don't want them to have to support within one business process multiple platforms, cloud and on-prem. Again, you are creating risks. So you've now taken all those considerations and you have identified waves. You know these applications should go together, these should go together, these should go together. Next question is, who goes first? Well, there's different reasons, and I'm not going to tell you that there's one absolute way you want to do this, but think about, identify which wave will give the biggest bang for the buck. Typically, those would be the wave with the applications that go to cloud because of the business agility, the increased resilience, etc. Your business will probably ask, well, they should go first. They are important. We need to do this for the customer. So that's a very good reason to have them go first. You may also want to say, well, yeah, they'll go, well, they go second because the first wave you want to do is a couple of relatively easy to migrate workloads, maybe not my highest risk, my most business critical, because you want to learn. You want to learn, collect your lessons learned, and then do the next one slightly better, slightly faster, slightly more effective. So I would typically argue, do a test run with some applications that if things do not go that well, can easily be rolled back, or if they are working less efficiently, less optimized, that it may not have a big business impact. On the other hand, you also want to look at refresh requirements on-prem. An application that runs on a server that needs to be refreshed because it's going out of support. Well, that's an important reason as well. So different reasons, collect them, put them all in a table, look at them, and then start building your case why you want to migrate your waves in a certain order. So let's pull it together. Know why you migrate. And because you can't make a business case without it. If you know why you migrate, what business value are you after, your patterns, your migration way, and the way your future cloud cost will happen, play a role. So if you don't know that, you fall in the trap of only looking at cost avoidance. And then your business case doesn't match what you want to do. And that doesn't make sense in my view. Use the tools available to build the first case and then start iterating, working on that, improving on that. Understand your application portfolio, including the importance to your business, because that will drive how those applications migrate and what benefits you're going to get. Look at the 6 or with VMware Cloud, the 7 R's. Go through your licenses early, figure out what you have, what is your exposure. Maybe you are already under licensed. Better know it now, better try to fix it. Flag the issues. Again, the tools will help you here, and it can also play a role into the determining what migration pattern to use. Add in your labor cost impact, the improved developer productivity, reduced operations costs, but also include training costs. And last but not least, leverage AWS migration incentive plans. AWS has quite a few plans that will pay you credits, and even sometimes there's money that they can pay to your migration partner for migration, what they call the mobilized phase, migration preparation, helping with the business case, etc. The migration acceleration plan, or called MAP, is fantastic, but it does carries your scope of to be migrated applications need to add up to about $500,000 in annual AWS spend. So that's very sizable. You don't need to do that in one go. You can reach that in a few years. If it's big enough, that's a plan I would definitely argue that you need to investigate and try to go for that. But there's other plans as well, even for somewhat smaller migration projects. I want to share one example, and it's an example from GE Oil and Gas, and it's not one of our own. Unfortunately, there's 2 reasons why I wanted to share it. It's a great documented case. If you look at, there's even a presentation from the CIO of GE Oil and Gas on an AWS summit a few years ago in Chicago, where he presented his story. And what I like is that they looked at all the 5 pillars of benefits from the cloud, and they tracked it. Now, you'll see that they didn't put financial numbers on most of them. Now, maybe they did, but they are not willing to share it publicly. That's fine. But at least they identified it, they tracked it, so they have in place, they knew what they were going to go after, and they measured so they could show, well, here's what we benefited. And it's not just from a financial point of view, 14 million in annual savings against a 14.2 million investment is a fantastic payback. So from a pure cost avoidance and savings, it's already a great case. But if you look at 77 faster time to market for business applications, 98 reduction in P1 and P0s, improved performance, reduced technical debt. There are a lot of things here that make sense, and that especially if you translate them to business terms, are important to the business, and they'll appreciate that. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. Next week I'm going to talk about migration preparation. Are you ready to migrate? And are you ready to start running cloud at scale once the migration is done? If you are not 100% sure that you can answer the 2 questions, ready for migration and ready to run cloud at scale, with a resounding yes, then I suggest you join back in a week from today. And even if you think you are, you may want to hear it anyway and go again through your own plans. And let us see whether there's any questions before we end this webinar. Thank you very much for listening.